So the other day, I was just walking around my house, minding my own business as I did, and my dad comes up to me and he asks me, "Sam, do you know what thick means?" And I'm not talking about thick with a CK, I'm talking about thick with a double C. So if you know what that means, you can imagine how uncomfortable I already was. But it gets worse, because after I told him what it meant, he then asked me, "So, is your mom thick?" And although this may seem insignificant to some, this got me thinking about the severity of the generational gaps between parents and their children. And growing up is already such a stressful experience where teenagers, like myself, mainly desire love and understanding from those around them, particularly our parents. And in a day and age where people and parents are constantly expected to care for the mental and physical health of their children with love, the expectation is high. Media campaigns constantly portray the ideal family with perfect relationships, but in the real world, this is not the case. Although every relationship is different, for many people, establishing a strong and very supportive connection with a parent or child can be very difficult because of the barriers that generational gaps present. But what is a generational gap? Well, a generational gap is the difference in beliefs and ideologies of two separate generations. Each generation has a specific set of characteristics which broadly encompass the people within that age range. For example, I am a member of Generation Z. My mom is a member of Generation X, people from ages 39 to 53 years old, while my dad is a member of the baby boomer generation, people from 55 to 75 years old. One major disparity between these older and younger generations is their familiarity with technology. Younger generations, such as millennials and Gen Z, are typically associated with tech savviness and being good at using computers, while older generations, such as the baby boomer generation and Gen X, are not. In my personal experience, I'm constantly helping my mom navigate the internet, use apps, but most importantly, teaching her how to use emojis. We haven't made a Bitmoji, but we're gonna get there eventually. And although these technological differences may seem futile at most, combined with social stress, academic pressure, and feeling misunderstood, these generational gaps can create huge cracks in the foundation of a parent-child relationship. Oftentimes, teenagers are stereotyped as angsty or hormonal messes, which is to some degree true, but there are so many other layers behind the classic line, "Mom, it's not a phase." In my experience, I've never felt completely understood by my parents. But I think it's important to note that there's a difference between being loved and being understood. And that distinguishment has always challenged my relationship with my mom and dad. Did I mention that I'm afraid of bees? And when I talk about bees, I'm not talking about the insect, the bee. I'm talking about the grade. And while most of this pressure is self-inflicted to do well in school, I still feel the stress and occasional anxiety that comes along with it. But I never wanted to tell my mom that I struggled to stay cool, calm, and collected in school. But to understand why, you need a little bit of background on my mom. My mom is a first-generation Korean immigrant who moved to New York when she was 16 years old. Overall, she's a very stoic and honest person, and sometimes she'll just come up to me and she'll look at me and she'll ask, "Sam, are you really going out like that?" And while I know she only wants what's best for me and loves me, it was very hard for me to realize that when she was constantly nitpicking the little things, such as getting a B on a test, or not having enough friends, or hanging out with my friends too much. So, in 7th grade, I sat down and I talked to her about how I felt constantly overwhelmed in school and anxious in social situations. But that day, my mom didn't tell me what to do. She didn't give me advice, and she didn't know how to help me. So the next day, and every day after that, we pretended like that conversation never happened. Now I realize that the growing awareness around mental health is very recent, and for people my mom's age and older, they were never educated on the importance of mental health. So, it makes sense that my mom wouldn't know what to do. She was never taught how to deal with that. She never imagined that her own daughter would come up to her and say, "I'm struggling and I need help." Nothing in her childhood taught her how to deal with that. So, I bottled up all these emotions, my frustration, my anger, and my sadness, and I channeled it into treating my mom in a way which I now regret. I disrespected my mom, and I treated her with indifference, and I said things that I wish I could take back now, but it was too late. I waited until sophomore year to open up again. In that time, I closed myself off from not only my mom, but my friends and everyone around me. I didn't want to sit down with my mom and have another conversation because I felt that if I made myself emotionally vulnerable again, my mom would see me as weak and lesser. Because my mom is the strongest woman I know. My mom is the strongest person I know. And the worst thing that anyone can say to me, especially my mom, is, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. Because something about those 6 words break my heart. So, in an effort to never hear those words again, I bottled myself up and I closed myself off from my emotions. But finally, after holding it all in for 4 years, I'd had enough. I forced my mom with myself to sit down and finally have another honest conversation. And I didn't hold back this time. I told her how I felt and how I felt that first time when she told me in 7th grade that she didn't know how to help me. And I realized that while I was considering my own perspective this entire time, I was completely ignoring my mom's side of the story. There was so much that I never knew about my mom because I never asked. I never knew that my mom worked at Taco Bell. I never knew that my mom played piano for 10 years. And I never knew that my mom helped to raise her little brother when she was growing up. There was so much that I never knew. Approaching this conversation was very difficult for me because I didn't want to make my mom feel guilty or responsible in any way because this generational gap that poses a barrier for our relationship is no one's fault. There is no guilty party in this. Sometimes it really do be like that. So, how do we close this gap? Well, the solution is simple. Talk to your parents and have them talk to you. Communicate with those around you and ask them how their day was and tell them how your day was in return. Although seemingly futile, this simple daily interaction can transform your relationship with your parents, and you may be surprised how your relationship can evolve. Another important solution is compromise. A relationship is like a rubber band. If you pull too hard, the band will break. But the rubber has enough give that if both sides meet in the middle, it will sustain. Compromise is only possible with active participation, and active participation comes from both sides willing to make a conscious effort. So, I urge you to open up to your parents and talk to those around you. But most importantly, just sit down and have an uncomfortably honest conversation. Because in the end, just don't be a stranger. Thank you.